I remember the exact moment I met Ethan. It was one of those glossy networking events where everyone wears their best suit and pretends their life is more put together than it really is. I had just turned 29, juggling freelance work and hustling to save enough for my dream, a business of my own. The idea was still just a vague vision, but it kept me up at night, scribbling notes and strategies in a tattered notebook. That night, I almost didn't go to the event. I felt out of place among polished entrepreneurs with LinkedIn-perfect smiles. But something told me I had to show up, even if I was just another nameless attendee awkwardly holding a plastic cup of bad wine. And then, there he was, Ethan, the guy who had a way of making everyone feel like they were the most interesting person in the room. He had an easy laugh, an air of confidence, and a knack for drawing people in. We got to talking, and it turned out we shared a similar ambition. He'd recently sold a small tech startup and was looking for his next big project. When I nervously mentioned my idea for a boutique fitness app, his eyes lit up. "That's brilliant," he said, leaning in as if I'd just revealed the next billion-dollar idea. "The fitness space is booming, but it's oversaturated with generic apps. Yours could stand out." For the first time in months, I felt validated. Someone as successful as Ethan believed in me, saw potential in my idea. Over the next few weeks, we kept in touch, brainstorming ways to make the app a reality. Ethan was full of ideas, offering insights I hadn't even considered. He talked about scaling, branding, investor pitches, all the things I knew little about. And when he proposed going into business together, it felt like fate. "Let's do this the right way," he said over coffee one afternoon. "If we pool our resources, we can fast-track the development process. You've got the concept, and I've got the experience. It's a perfect match." Looking back, I should have questioned why someone with Ethan's supposed success needed a partner like me, someone with no track record and limited funds. But his confidence was contagious, and I was desperate to make the app happen. So, I said yes. We decided to split everything 50-50. I withdrew every penny of my savings, $45,000, and transferred it to our new business account. Ethan promised he was matching my contribution. "This is the beginning of something big," he said, clinking his coffee cup against mine. I believed him. The first few months were a blur of excitement and hard work. Ethan and I met almost daily, sketching out the app's features and meeting with developers. He handled most of the logistics, insisting that his background in tech made him better suited for managing the nitty-gritty details. I focused on the creative side, branding, marketing ideas, and refining the user experience. We were a team, or so I thought. Ethan quickly became the face of our project. He was great at pitching the app to potential investors, his charm and polished presentation skills making him a natural salesman. I didn't mind staying in the background, I was just grateful to be part of something I believed in. But as time went on, cracks began to show. At first, they were small, barely noticeable. Ethan started rescheduling meetings at the last minute, always with a plausible excuse. "Sorry, got tied up with a client call," he'd text. Or, "running late, grab lunch without me." It was annoying, but I figured he was just busy juggling multiple responsibilities. Then there were the missed payments. Developers began emailing me directly, asking when they'd be compensated for their work. Confused, I brought it up to Ethan during one of our meetings. He waved it off. "It's just a cash flow thing," he said, not even looking up from his phone. "Startups are always tight in the beginning. Don't stress, it's normal." I wanted to believe him. After all, I had no experience running a business. Maybe this was just part of the process, the kind of growing pains every entrepreneur faces. But the late payments didn't stop. And neither did Ethan's evasiveness. One night, I stayed late at the co-working space we'd rented. Ethan had left hours earlier, claiming he had a dinner meeting with a potential investor. As I sifted through emails, I came across another invoice from one of our developers. This one was marked, Final Notice. Something about the tone of the email, urgent, frustrated, made my stomach twist. I decided to log into our shared business account to check the balance. Ethan had set up the account when we first started, and I'd never bothered to access it before. He'd insisted on handling the finances, saying it was more efficient that way. But now, I needed to see for myself. When the account summary loaded, I froze. The balance was $3,218.49. That couldn't be right. We'd started with $90,000, my $45,000 and Ethan's supposed contribution. My mind raced as I scrolled through the transaction history. The withdrawals were all there, one after another, like a trail of breadcrumbs leading straight to Ethan. $1,200 for a luxury watch. $800 at a high-end restaurant. $5,000 transferred to what looked like a personal account. The list went on, each line item more damning than the last. I felt sick. My hands shook as I clicked through the statements, hoping, praying, that I was misunderstanding something. But there was no mistake. Ethan had drained almost everything. I called him immediately. He didn't pick up. Furious, I sent him a text, "Call me now. We need to talk." When he finally called back an hour later, his tone was casual, almost bored. "Hey, what's up?" "Don't play dumb," I snapped, my voice trembling. "I saw the account. Where's the money, Ethan?" There was a pause, just long enough to make my blood boil. Then he sighed. "Look, it's not as bad as you're making it out to be. I had to cover some personal expenses, but it's all temporary. I'll put the money back." "Temporary?" I shouted, barely able to contain my anger. "You've been using our business account as your personal piggy bank. Do you have any idea what you've done?" His tone shifted then, growing cold. "Calm down. This is how business works. Sometimes you have to make sacrifices to keep things afloat." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Sacrifices? You've left us with nothing. That money was everything I had." "Don't be so dramatic," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You'll get over it." And then he hung up. Just like that. I sat there, staring at my phone in disbelief. The man I had trusted, someone I had considered a friend, had stolen from me, and he didn't even seem to care. My chest tightened as a wave of humiliation and rage washed over me. He thought he could get away with it, that I'd just roll over and accept it. But he didn't know me. Not really. If Ethan thought he could destroy my dream and walk away unscathed, he was about to learn just how wrong he was. I spent the rest of that night pacing the tiny living room of my apartment, alternating between tears and bursts of anger so intense I thought I might put my fist through the wall. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Ethan's smug face, heard his dismissive tone. "You'll get over it." Those words rang in my ears, taunting me. The money was gone, my savings obliterated, and my dream, the business I'd sacrificed years for, was nothing but a sinking ship he had abandoned without a second thought. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I turned my despair into action. I pulled out my laptop and started combing through every scrap of documentation I had on Ethan. Emails, text messages, bank transactions, meeting notes, anything that might help me piece together the full scope of what he had done. It became clear that this wasn't just carelessness or bad business decisions. Ethan had planned this. He had never been my partner, he'd been a parasite, bleeding me dry while pretending to be my ally. The next morning, I called the developers and vendors who had worked on the app. One by one, I apologized for the unpaid invoices and explained the situation as best I could without breaking down. Most of them were surprisingly understanding, though some were understandably angry. A developer named Priya, who had done most of the app's coding, told me something that stopped me in my tracks. "You're not the first person he's done this to," she said, her voice laced with bitterness. I worked with him on another project a couple of years ago. Same story. Big promises, but the money never materialized. He left me hanging for months before I finally gave up on ever getting paid. My stomach churned. Why didn't you say anything? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I tried, Priya replied. But people like Ethan, they're slippery. They know how to cover their tracks just enough to avoid getting caught. And honestly, most people don't have the energy to fight back. They just cut their losses and move on. Her words hit me like a slap in the face. Was that what I was supposed to do? Just walk away and let Ethan continue his cycle of manipulation and theft? The thought made my blood boil. I wasn't going to be another one of his victims, another name on a long list of people he had taken advantage of. If Priya and others hadn't been able to stop him, then maybe it was time someone did. I spent the next few days laying low, gathering my strength and strategizing my next move. Ethan was still out there, probably convinced that I was licking my wounds and too defeated to fight back. I was going to use that to my advantage. If he thought I was done, he wouldn't see what was coming. First, I started digging into Ethan's past. It didn't take long to find skeletons in his closet. He had a history of failed ventures and lawsuits, though nothing had ever stuck. He always managed to slip through the cracks, settling out of court or disappearing before things got too serious. But there was one case that caught my attention, a fraud charge from 5 years ago in another state. According to the court documents, Ethan had been accused of embezzling funds from a tech startup he co-founded. The case had been dropped due to insufficient evidence, but the allegations were eerily similar to what he had done to me. Next, I set up a meeting with a lawyer. I couldn't afford someone high-profile, but the attorney I found was sharp and willing to help. I laid everything out for her, the missing money, the fraudulent transactions, the unpaid invoices. She listened carefully, taking notes as I spoke. "You have a strong case," she said when I finished. "But it's going to be an uphill battle. People like Ethan are experts at staying just within the bounds of the law. We'll need concrete evidence to prove he acted with malicious intent." "I have evidence," I said, pulling out the folder of documents I had compiled. "Bank statements, emails, texts. It's all here." She flipped through the papers, her brow furrowing. "This is a good start," she said. "But we'll need more if we want to make this stick. Have you thought about going to the authorities?" I hesitated. The thought of involving the police made me nervous. What if they didn't take me seriously? What if Ethan managed to talk his way out of it, like he always did? But I knew I couldn't let my fear hold me back. "I'll do whatever it takes," I said firmly. The lawyer nodded. "Good. Let's get to work." While she began building the legal case, I focused on something else, exposing Ethan for who he really was. If the law couldn't hold him accountable, then I would destroy the one thing he valued most, his reputation. I created a fake social media account, posing as a potential investor. Ethan had always been hungry for attention and validation, and I knew he couldn't resist the prospect of new money. I sent him a message, pretending to be a tech entrepreneur interested in partnering with him on his next venture. It didn't take long for him to bite. Over the course of a week, I carefully cultivated the persona. I flattered him, asked about his successes, and expressed interest in hearing more about his current projects. Ethan, ever the narcissist, eagerly shared details about his latest scheme, a cryptocurrency startup targeting small business owners. He painted a picture of himself as a visionary, a man ahead of his time. It made me sick to read his messages, but I played along, asking just enough questions to keep him talking. As I gathered more information, I began piecing together the scope of his new scam. He was preying on people like me, people with big dreams and limited resources, spinning promises of wealth and success while siphoning their money into his own pocket. It was a pattern, one he had perfected over years of deceit. But this time, I was going to stop him. Once I had enough evidence, I started reaching out to others who had crossed paths with Ethan. Priya connected me with several former colleagues and vendors, all of whom had their own horror stories about working with him. Some were reluctant to talk, afraid of retaliation or simply too exhausted to rehash the past. But others were eager to help, sharing invoices, contracts, and emails that painted a damning picture of Ethan's methods. I compiled everything into a dossier, a comprehensive account of his fraud, complete with names, dates, and dollar amounts. It was a smoking gun, one I planned to use to bring him down. But before I went public, I needed to make sure I was ready for the fallout. Ethan wouldn't go down without a fight, and I had to be prepared for whatever he threw my way. The night before I launched my plan, I sat alone in my apartment, staring at the folder on my desk. This was it, the culmination of weeks of work, of sleepless nights and relentless determination. I felt a surge of fear, wondering if I was making a mistake. What if it backfired? What if Ethan found a way to turn the tables on me? But then I thought about everything he had taken from me. My money, my dream, my trust. I thought about the other people he had hurt, the lives he had disrupted with his lies and greed. And I knew I couldn't back down. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about making sure he could never do this to anyone else. Taking a deep breath, I opened my laptop and began typing. The morning I went public with my plan, my heart raced like I'd just run a marathon. I felt a mix of adrenaline, fear, and exhilaration as I hit post on every major platform I could think of: Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn. The dossier I'd compiled was uploaded as a downloadable file, complete with screenshots of emails, invoices, text messages, and bank statements. I wrote a scathing caption that detailed everything Ethan had done, not just to me, but to the others he had manipulated and stolen from over the years. I tagged everyone who might have an interest in the story: business groups, tech forums, even a few journalists who covered startup fraud. Most importantly, I tagged Ethan himself. If he thought he could ignore this or quietly sweep it under the rug, he was about to get a rude awakening. Within hours, the post began to gain traction. Comments started flooding in, some from people expressing outrage, others from those who claimed they'd had similar experiences with shady business partners. A few people even shared their own stories about Ethan, piling onto the mountain of evidence I had already gathered. It was like a dam had broken, and all the pent-up frustration and anger his victims had felt over the years came pouring out. I kept refreshing my notifications, watching as the number of shares climbed into the hundreds, then the thousands. By midday, the post had gone viral. News outlets started reaching out to me, asking for interviews. One reporter even called Ethan directly for a comment. He must have been blindsided because, according to the article, he refused to answer any questions and hung up the phone. But the real chaos started when his investors saw the post. A few of them had backed his latest cryptocurrency scam, and they were furious. They started withdrawing their funds, and soon the project he had been boasting about to me as the next big thing began to crumble before his eyes. I'll admit, I took a sick sense of satisfaction in watching it all unfold. Ethan had spent years building a persona, a carefully crafted image of success and charm, and I had ripped it to shreds in a single day. But I wasn't naive enough to think it was over. I knew Ethan well enough to know that he wouldn't go down without a fight. Sure enough, that evening, my phone rang. It was him. "Wow," he said when I picked up, his voice dripping with venom. "You really went for it, didn't you? Dragging my name through the mud like that. You think you're some kind of hero?" "I think I'm someone who's tired of being stepped on," I shot back. My voice was steady, but my hands were shaking. "You stole from me, Ethan. From all of us. Did you really think I'd just let that slide?" "You don't know what you've done," he said, his tone darkening. "This is defamation, and I can sue you for every penny you don't have. You think you're hurting me, but you're just making yourself look desperate." "Go ahead and try," I said, my anger rising. Everything I posted is backed by evidence, and you know it. If you want to take this to court, I'll gladly meet you there. But something tells me you don't want the legal system digging into your finances." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When he finally spoke, his voice was cold. "You're making a mistake. You think you're winning, but you have no idea what I'm capable of." The line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone, a knot of unease forming in my stomach. I tried to shake it off. He was bluffing. He had to be. But a part of me couldn't help but wonder if I'd just poked a bear that was far more dangerous than I realized. The next day, I found out just how far Ethan was willing to go. When I logged into my email, I was greeted with a flood of messages from people claiming to represent Ethan. They accused me of lying, demanded that I take down the post, and threatened legal action if I didn't comply. Some of the emails were from actual lawyers, others were clearly fake, hastily written attempts to intimidate me. But the worst part was the personal attacks. Ethan had apparently shared my contact information with some of his more loyal supporters, and they weren't shy about letting me know how they felt. "You're a fraud," one email read. "No wonder your business failed. You're just bitter because you couldn't cut it." Another message was even more disturbing: "You'd better watch your back. People like you don't last long when they make enemies." I tried to brush it off, but the constant barrage of threats and insults began to wear me down. I started looking over my shoulder whenever I left my apartment, half expecting someone to confront me on the street. I even considered taking down the post, just to make it stop. But every time I thought about backing down, I remembered the look on Ethan's face when he told me to get over it. I wasn't going to let him win. Instead, I doubled down. I contacted the news outlets that had reached out to me and agreed to do interviews. I shared my story in as much detail as I could, making sure to highlight the evidence I had against Ethan. The more I spoke out, the harder it became for him to discredit me. People were starting to see him for who he really was, a con artist who had spent his career preying on others. But the turning point came when one of Ethan's former investors reached out to me. His name was Robert, and he had poured nearly $200,000 into one of Ethan's failed ventures. He told me how Ethan had strung him along with promises of big returns, only to disappear when the business collapsed. "I've been waiting for someone like you to come along," Robert said during our phone call. "I didn't have the guts to take him on, but you've done what I couldn't. If you need support, legal, financial, anything, you've got it." With Robert's help, I was able to file a formal complaint against Ethan with the authorities. Between the evidence I had gathered and the testimonies from other victims, the case against him was airtight. It wasn't long before the police launched an investigation into his activities. Ethan must have known the walls were closing in because he started reaching out to me directly. At first, he tried to play nice, offering to settle if I agreed to take down my posts and stop cooperating with the authorities. When I refused, he switched tactics, accusing me of being vindictive and trying to ruin his life out of spite. "Is this really what you want?" he asked during one of his late-night calls. "To destroy everything I've built?" "You destroyed it yourself, Ethan," I replied. "I'm just making sure everyone knows the truth." For the first time, he sounded desperate. "We could fix this, you know. Start over. Work together again. You're good at what you do, I can admit that now. We could make something even better than the app." I laughed bitterly. "You don't get it, do you? This was never about the app. It's about the people you've hurt. The lies you've told. The lives you've ruined. You don't get to walk away from this." The line went silent, and for a moment, I wondered if he had hung up. But then he spoke, his voice low and venomous. "You'll regret this. I promise you." I hung up, my hands trembling. His words echoed in my mind, but I pushed them aside. The wheels were already in motion, and there was no turning back now. Ethan had spent his life dodging consequences, but this time, he had nowhere left to run. The day Ethan was arrested was supposed to feel like victory. After weeks of waiting, strategizing, and surviving his pathetic attempts to intimidate me, I finally got the call from my lawyer. "They've issued a warrant," she said, her voice calm but tinged with satisfaction. "The police have everything they need, thanks to your evidence. It's over." That evening, I sat on my couch, scrolling through social media, where the news had already started to break. Photos of Ethan being led out of his downtown apartment in handcuffs were everywhere. The caption on one post read, "Tech entrepreneur arrested for fraud, a rise built on lies." Commenters were gleeful, dragging him through the mud, calling him everything from a con artist to human garbage. I should have felt vindicated. This was what I'd fought for, right? But as I stared at the screen, I felt empty. It wasn't relief, and it definitely wasn't joy. Maybe it was the realization that no amount of justice would bring back my $45,000. Or maybe it was the nagging sense that, knowing Ethan, this wasn't the end. And I was right. 2 weeks after Ethan's arrest, my lawyer called again. "There's something you need to see," she said. Her tone was off, urgent, but cautious. She sent me a link to a breaking news article, and when I clicked it, my heart dropped. The headline read, "Fraud Investigation Takes Turn, Whistleblower Under Scrutiny." I scanned the article, my stomach tightening with every line. Somehow, Ethan had flipped the narrative. He'd told investigators that I wasn't just his business partner, I was an accomplice. He claimed that I'd been the one to propose the fraudulent transactions, that I'd used the business account for my own expenses and framed him to cover my tracks. Are they seriously buying this? I asked my lawyer, my voice rising. "No," she said quickly. "There's no evidence to support his claims, and everything you've provided clears you. But this is Ethan's Hail Mary. He's desperate, and he's trying to drag you down with him." I thought I was prepared for anything, but this was next-level devious, even for Ethan. He wasn't just fighting to save himself, he was trying to destroy me in the process. And it didn't end there. Within hours, I started receiving hateful messages on social media. His loyalists, or bots he'd likely paid for, had launched a full-on smear campaign against me. "Nice try, thief. We know the truth now. You're just as bad as he is. Hope you rot in jail too." It was relentless. Everywhere I turned, Ethan's lies were spreading like wildfire. He might have been sitting in a jail cell, but his reach was far from limited. I tried to stay calm, but the pressure was unbearable. People started questioning my intentions, even those who had supported me before. The media, always hungry for a twist, began to paint me as a complicated figure, someone who might not be entirely innocent. Was the whistleblower complicit all along? One headline read. It didn't matter that there was no evidence, the damage was already done. Then came the final blow. One night, as I sat in my apartment scrolling through the endless wave of online vitriol, I got a message from a burner email account. The subject line read, "You're not as smart as you think." I hesitated before opening it, a sick feeling twisting in my gut. The message was short but devastating. "Check your bank account." My hands shook as I logged into my personal banking app. When the screen loaded, I felt the blood drain from my face. My account was empty. Every last cent, gone. A second email came through almost immediately. This one included a screenshot, a fake transfer authorization form with my name on it, sending the entirety of my remaining funds to some offshore account. At the bottom of the form was Ethan's smug signature. The bastard had somehow orchestrated this from behind bars. I didn't even know how it was possible, but with Ethan, nothing was off limits. He hadn't just stolen my money again, he'd made it look like I'd done it to myself. I called my bank, frantic, but the representative told me it could take weeks to investigate. Meanwhile, I was left with nothing, no savings, no emergency fund, no way to pay my rent. Ethan had stripped me of everything. For days, I couldn't think straight. I barely ate or slept. My mind raced with questions. How had he done it? Who was helping him? And most importantly, why? Was it revenge? A final power move to prove that no matter what I did, he would always be one step ahead? And then, just when I thought I couldn't sink any lower, I got a third email. Meet me. You know where. It didn't include a name, but I knew it was from Ethan. My first instinct was to delete it, to block the address and try to move on. But then I thought about everything he had taken from me, not just my money, but my peace, my reputation, my dignity. If I didn't confront him now, I'd spend the rest of my life wondering what he wanted. So, against my better judgment, I replied, when? The meeting took place in a grimy, barely lit visitor's room at the detention center where Ethan was being held. I half expected him to look disheveled, beaten down by the weight of his circumstances. Instead, he sauntered in like he owned the place, his orange jumpsuit doing nothing to diminish his arrogance. Long time no see, he said, smirking as he sat across from me. What do you want, Ethan? I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. Haven't you taken enough? Oh, come on, he said, leaning back in his chair. You didn't really think it was going to be that easy, did you? Expose me, ruin my reputation, and just walk away. I had to remind you who you're dealing with. You're pathetic, I shot back. You're in jail. You've lost everything. And yet, here you are, still trying to play games. Ethan's smirk widened. Lost everything? Sweetheart, this is just a timeout. A little setback. And you? You're already on the way down. The court of public opinion is a funny thing, isn't it? You make one move to defend yourself, and they'll call you a liar. You do nothing, and they'll assume I was right all along. I clenched my fists under the table, resisting the urge to scream. You'll rot in here, Ethan. That's the difference between us. You're finished, and I'll rebuild. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. Maybe. Or maybe I've already won. See, the thing about people like you think you're better than the game, but you're not. You're just another player, and I've been doing this a lot longer than you. As I left the detention center, his words echoed in my head, unsettling in their confidence. It wasn't over, not by a long shot. Ethan had burned my life to the ground, but I wasn't going to let him walk away with the satisfaction of seeing me give up. If this was the game he wanted to play, then so be it. He'd taught me one valuable lesson: revenge wasn't a sprint, it was a marathon. And I wasn't done running yet.